Welcome to today's lecture on the scholarly literature research process. We're going to begin by defining your current assignment, the literature review, and its place within your disciplinary community. We'll then dive into the process of a scholarly search, starting with a vague idea and ending with a set of sources that you'll later dive into. Throughout this lecture, I'll go between the theories behind scholarly searching and the nuts and bolts, so you'll be able to take away some higher order thinking around primary source research, as well as practical tips for how to start your literature review. The first thing I'd like to talk about today is the why of a literature review. Why would we research the literature of a field? Why wouldn't we just jump right into designing research questions and methods and reporting on our results? Well, the reason is because, like anything else, research must begin with a foundation. Birkenkotter and Hucken argue that a scientist is made into a scientist in many ways by the way they situate their own understandings of the physical and social world within a framework of already accepted knowledge. We talked about this in the last lecture, that the scientific discourse community requires a rigorous system of validation through replication of results and peer review. A literature review is one of the first steps toward validating your own results by saying that your results extend from a set of already established and proven sources. So what is a literature review, actually? You can see in the image to the right here a very small image of the front page of a typical primary source scholarly article. Primary source meaning that it is reporting new results, specifically a new way of doing research, i.e. a methodology, about how to use bibliometrics to conduct a scholarly literature review. You can see in this first page that there is an abstract at the top, an introduction to the topic. Here's the abstract, here's the introduction, and immediately after that, a literature review. The literature review comes first because it is that important to the building of scientific knowledge. The article establishes a topic, bibliometric use in scholarly reviews, and then discusses what has already been said about that topic. From there, the authors will discuss what they see as missing from the literature, what we often refer to as the gap, and will fill that gap with their own results. The literature review is the foundation of producing new knowledge. It is a survey of recent primary source literature around a specific topic that synthesizes what has already been said and establishes a clear way in which the present research is extending, refining, or challenging what has already been said. In this example here, you can see that it is a genre embedded within a journal article, but many journals publish literature reviews all on their own, so they also operate as their own genre. In the last lecture, I discussed with you the ways scientific knowledge is developed through both logos, or logical reasoning, and ethos, or demonstration of character. The literature review does both of these things. It establishes that you have an understanding of what has already been said and can reasonably and logically extend your own research from a strong foundation. It also demonstrates your status and place within the disciplinary community. You've done your research. You know what's up. You're not naive, nor are you arrogant, for you have done the work necessary to understand the full picture. One of the most important things to note about a literature review is that it does not report new results and is therefore a secondary source document. It does, however, report on primary source documents, so the literature you review should be primary sources, or again, articles that report on the results of some kind of experiment or analysis. In this way, a literature review actually acts as a kind of second-tier peer review. Your literature review is going to include certain articles, and by doing so will validate them. You might also challenge some of the studies you include. They might be valid, but they have limitations and gaps. In that way, you are also serving as a peer reviewer in saying that the research that has been done could be more thorough. Okay. It's a pretty thorough definition of a literature review, the product of a very long process which I'm about to walk through with you. It's important to realize that the literature reviews we read are succinct, effortless, easy to read, and easy to understand most of the time at least. but they are the result of a recursive process that takes time. So before we jump into how to start your literature review, I want to first establish that there is one characteristic of this process that you want to keep in mind, and that is hard for many undergraduate and even early career researchers to understand. Scholarly research is recursive. You will not do one thing, then another, and end with a literature review. You will develop an idea, go to the literature, refine your idea, narrow it, broaden it, go back to the literature, ask questions, go back to the literature, and so on and on. Be open to this process. If you are, it can feel like a scavenger hunt, something that clicks in the most curious and inventive parts of your brain. If you aren't open, it can feel like you're slogging through ideas and can never get a read on what direction you should take. Revel in the newness of these ideas, the questions that you get to ask, and the things you'll get to learn. We'll also talk about when literature reviews need to end, though you can genuinely search forever if you don't have a sense of when to end. I've made it a bit easier for you this semester by giving you a set amount of articles, but that range, 10 to 15, will allow you to see that there isn't actually a number of articles that is reasonable for a review. You may have 10 and that's enough, or you may have 10 and have stopped too short, have missed an integral part of the research. Likewise, you may have 15 and that's enough, or you may have 15 sources and have used too many, haven't made the best decisions about inclusion and exclusion. In any case, you'll find your groove by being open to this recursive process of searching for scholarly literature. All right, let's start with some nuts and bolts of the search process. Some of you might already be interested in a specific topic for your research, a topic that will propel you into graduate school or industry research and development. If you have an idea, great. We're still going to talk about how to craft it into something that is usable for searching for scholarly literature. But to begin, let's talk about what makes a good topic, a topic that can be researched and written about for this assignment. A good topic is generally one that meets 3 criteria. It's something you're interested in, something you have some level of experience in, and probably most importantly, it's something that others are going to find interesting. Another way of saying if your topic would be of interest to others is it relevant? Does it speak to timely issues of the scientific community? But how do you know if it's interesting to others? Well, a good indicator is that it's being published on right now. So your first test in dealing with the recursivity of scholarly searching is to go figure out if people have actually said things about your idea. The first step into the research to figure out if your topic is relevant is called exploratory research. It means that you're not committing to anything just yet, that you're using your research to refine, change, and challenge what you think might be your topic. The first step is to go back to that place where your interests and your experience combines. As an example, my interests are in makerspaces, and my experiences with making are in craft communities and hacker communities. I'm going to try to distill those intersecting ideas into a set of key terms that I'll use to search. Obviously, makerspace is going to be one of those terms, and maybe craft will be another. I'll note here that craft is a pretty vague term, so I might want to figure out how I can specify that to actually get results. I might be specifically interested in stitch and bitch communities, so I'll have that as a research term. I'll then think about other ways of saying what I want to say, other modifiers that will help specify my terms. I might be interested in nonprofit makerspaces in particular, so I can add that in as a key term to use. I might be interested in gender makeup of patrons, so I might add gender as a key term. Start off with a set of 5 or 10 key terms that you can use to begin with, but be prepared to refine these terms even further as you search. You'll then go to the library's website and plug those terms into the search bar by using some of the following tips. There are a few ways you can refine your search through what we call search operators. The first thing to keep in mind is that you can put quotation marks around any set of words, and your search engine will consider those terms as a string, a set of words that it will look for together. In other words, if you search just makerspace nonprofits, it will pull up articles that have the term makerspace or the term nonprofits. That's going to give you a lot of results. But putting them in a string and searching for quotation mark makerspace nonprofits, end quotation mark, will prompt the engine to look for those two words together. Much fewer results. You can also use Boolean operators to help to refine your search, and will search for all of the terms and or strings you plug into the search engine, though not necessarily together or in that order. As a result, you'll get a narrower set of articles to look for as you are specifying your terms. Or will get you articles that have either one term or another, and will therefore give you more articles than before. You might use this if there are synonyms for a particular term you're wanting to use. Not will access articles that have one term but not another, because you're specifying what to include and what to exclude in your search. You're narrowing your results. You might use not if you know that using a term will get you articles that you're not particularly interested in reading. For example, you may want to search for makerspaces, but not anything gender related. So you would search makerspace, not gender. And finally, you can further filter your search in Summons by checking the peer review box. This will only pull peer-reviewed pieces. You can also check the journal articles box so that you don't get books, book chapters, or electronic resources, which for our purposes are probably not going to be feasible or useful, simply because they're longer. You might also specify the time frame for when the article was published. You might want to look for articles only published since 2012, or articles specifically published in a given year. If you're doing a historical search, you might want to look for some articles from 1970 to 1990, and that will help specify your search as well. To show you what that whole process looks like visually, here on the right is what you'll see when you load up the library website. This is the Summons search bar, and you can plug in your search terms here. Once you hit that, you'll be taken to a summary page with articles on the left and books on the right. For our purposes, again, you want to only look at articles, and so you'll click the See All Some Number article results. You'll be taken from there to an aggregated list of articles, where you can see on the sidebar all your options for refining your results further. At the top, you'll see Full Text Online is already checked. Keep that there. It means that the results shown have downloadable PDFs so that you can actually view the article. Go ahead and check the peer review box and uncheck all content types other than journal article. To specify publication date, you'll have to scroll down a bit on the sidebar and you can specify dates or choose last 12 months, last 3 years, or last 5 years. In this search in particular, I've chosen the last 5 years. All right. Now we have some terms, and we're searching for articles. Typically, you find out whether something will be useful to you by looking at the abstract alone. Flag or download anything that you think might be relevant. Again, relevance is simply what feels applicable and what feels like it is of interest to others. Consider a few things as you run through the articles you pull. Does it reinforce something you already believe or know to be true? It might be useful. Does it challenge something you already believe or know to be true? That definitely will be useful. Does it agree or disagree with an article you've already looked at? Definitely add that to your potential list. Does it extend or refine an idea from another article? This kind of article will also be useful. Flag all of these so you can look closer at them later. But one of the goals of exploratory researching, which is where we are now, is to figure out if what's been said changes your original search terms. Maybe the issue isn't makerspace and craft at all, but makerspaces and farm production, or makerspaces and knitting and sewing in particular. Your exploratory search should change how you conceive of your project, so revise your terms at this point. Go back to the drawing board, go back to the search with new terms, and keep at this until you start to see a clear idea emerge. I want to make a quick side comment here about reliability in sources. Generally, by searching for peer-reviewed journal articles in the library's Summons systems, you won't really have to worry about reliability. Your sources will, by definition of the peer review identifier, be peer-reviewed, validated, and credible. However, just to be sure, and in case you look elsewhere for scholarly research, let's figure out what makes a reliable primary source. On the left-hand side, I have content concerns, and on the right-hand side, this mostly includes concerns about authorship. Both of these are integral to a source being credible. Let's start with content. First, a reliable source is one in which there is a clearly articulated purpose and a question, problem, or issue that is being addressed. This is pretty easy to find. You might find it in a quote such as, "In this article, the authors will examine X in order to do Y." The article also needs to provide evidence that is relevant to its stated purpose or question. In other words, the data must answer the questions that are being asked. Any arguments, interpretations, or conclusions that are made need to be based on presented information, not on outside information or assumptions. In other words, the data must follow from the research question, and the conclusions must follow from the data. That seems simple, but a lot of times it doesn't happen that way. And finally, any assumptions that are made are clearly articulated and do not go unsaid. If the author is assuming that you have an understanding of a primary theory they're using, they might not be as reliable as an author who clearly articulates that grounding. Now, for authorship, generally your author needs to be an expert in their field. They have a PhD and a demonstrated record of work in that discipline. The increasingly interdisciplinary nature of science makes it sometimes hard to figure out whether an author is an expert or expert adjacent. But generally, if they are connected to an institution of higher learning and have a PhD after their name, you can assume they are an expert. The author must also cite reputable sources. They should ground their research in something that actually has substance. The author should also have published this article relatively recently, which helps contribute to its timeliness and relevance. The funding structures for the research should be dedicated to accuracy. You'll sometimes come across authors who are funded through dubious means, and that should reflect on the credibility of the research. And finally, the author should also check their own biases, especially if they're working in the social sciences or are working on issues of social structures. So now that you've done the work of exploratory searching, you can continue to go back and forth between research and topic, and finally narrow the scope of your literature review into a fully formed direction for your research. The scope of your review is the specific boundaries that you're interested in exploring. The topic that I started with in my example today was makerspace, with a pretty vague idea of craft as being connected to it. Through this exploratory process, I can narrow my terms down to a specific question or idea that I aim to dive into. In the assignment sheet for your literature review, I mentioned that it's a good idea to have your scope articulated as a question, as it actually makes it easier to determine whether the sources you found help you answer that question. For example, my scope might be, how do makerspaces and gender intersect? I can clearly see the key terms in that question, makerspaces and gender. I can use these terms to finalize my search and gather my primary sources. While this process has demonstrated one way of finding scholarly sources for a literature review, please keep in mind that you might begin with a question and draw your original key terms from that question, continually refining the question through research until you have something that feels right. In your activity for this week, I've given you the option to begin with the top journal in your field rather than the whole NC State summons system. The same search rules apply, but you've simply narrowed your choices down to one particular journal. You might also find a review article that's already been written or a bibliography of a source that seems really relevant to you, and pick and choose the articles that it mentions to take a deeper look. This is where you might find that scavenger hunt aspect of this process. You can follow a thread from one bibliography to another and really start to coalesce around a specific idea. Try out any or even all of these strategies to figure out what works best for you. And that's what I really want to come back around to, is that there's not one way to do this process, but figure out what works for you. So from here, you're going to gather your sources, you're going to read their abstracts, and you're going to jot down their citations, as many as what feels complete, as many as what represents a complex and wide-ranging set of ideas around your specific topic. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about what to actually do with this research, how to read, how to annotate, and start to draft your review. I'll see you then.